Hi, I'm Benny
My name
Morris.
is Yossi Klein Halevi.
I'm Lahav Harkov.
I'm David Stav.
My name is Einat Wilf.
And this is 18 questions.
18 questions.
For 40 Israeli
for 40
thinkers.
Israeli thinkers.
From 1840.
From 1840.
From 1840.
Hi, my name is Sruli Fruchter, and I am the interviewer from 18 Questions, 40 Israeli Thinkers, and this is 18 Questions, 40 Israeli Thinkers from 1840. What has been Israel's greatest success and greatest mistake in its current war against Hamas? I asked this question to 40 Israeli thinkers, trying to understand what they viewed in their particular period when they were being interviewed, which stretches from June of 2024 to June of 2025. And at every single month, at every single week, at every single day, the circumstances and the knowledge of what was happening in the broader war, in Israeli society, and in the world at large was constantly shifting. I asked this question in a very strategic way to have people, whether they are more supportive of the war or more critical of the war, try and think about the other side. If they are someone who is more critical, great, we want to hear what you think was the greatest mistake made in this war. But we also want you to tell us what you think has been the greatest success in this war, because there is nothing that is black and white. Everything has gradations of nuance. And leaning into that nuance and trying to move beyond the ideological lines and the partisan divisions that people often bind themselves to, we want everyone to expand a little bit and give us more insight into how they view this war. Not just the good and the great, but also the bad and the ugly, and vice versa, depending on whichever they are most used to giving their voice to. A lot of what I looked for in this answer was some sort of originality. Let's set aside the content of what someone might say, and obviously everyone has their opinions of what is a valid view of what is a successful victory in the war and what has been a bad mistake in the war. But I was interested in which thinkers were able to move beyond things that are just happen to be in the news cycle right now and can actually articulate something that is new, that is original, that is really speaking to that blurry line of ambiguity where the success and the mistake are not so clear or obvious to everyone. Fleur Hasan-Nahoum, a political thinker and a lawyer, gave a very interesting answer when she was speaking about the success as a restoration of deterrence, of Israel pushing off Hamas and showing the world that they have reason to fear, they are deterred from just attacking Israel and not expecting any blowback. That answer in itself is not what particularly drew me. What interested me is how she explained the failure. She saw Israel's greatest failure in this war, not particularly in the active military war against Hamas, but in what she called the war of words. In the media narrative, in the public relations, in the hasbara that Israel was taking in explaining its aims, in explaining its actions, and in explaining its goals. I think that how Fleur identified this was very interesting, and it even led us to a fascinating discussion about the United States, about Trump, and about the United States and Israel's alignment throughout the course of this war.
I think it's very difficult to talk about success when we still have 59 hostages, 20, 21, two of them alive, to call about success. But I think the greatest success we've had is that we've managed to restore deterrence. It turns out that on the 7th of October, Hamas was not deterred, and Hezbollah was not deterred in the north on the 8th of October. The Houthis don't seem deterred still. Our only real strength is deterrence. What does deterrence mean? Nobody will strike us because they fear that us striking them back is bad for them. And I think, for the most part, we've re-established deterrence. That's our greatest success. Our greatest failure is that we have not taken and do not take the invisible war seriously, which is the war of words, the war of rhetoric, the war for the hearts and minds of normal people. We have never invested in it. We don't have a strategy for it. We don't put our best soldiers, we don't have a headquarters, we don't have a real solution. And I blame Israel for that.
But hasn't the Hasbara empire, or at least, not necessarily cohesive, but Hasbara as a force within Jewish and Israeli society, been heavily invested in over at least the last 2 decades or so? What do you feel like has been particularly lacking that has made them unprepared for this war on words?
The only investment that has been done in Hasbara has been bottom up. Has been by non-profit organizations who understood that the Israeli government has no intention to actually take it seriously. And I think that there's so much you can do bottom up you also need a top-down solution, and we've never had a top-down solution. And that's really the problem. Israelis, and the success of Israeli governments, not this particular government, all governments, have always seen the communications war as a nice to have and not a need to have. And unfortunately, in this war, we've discovered that losing the communications war has also affected our ability to fight the military war. And that is what I would hope they would have taken seriously. But today, we don't have, the Prime Minister doesn't have a foreign spokesperson. There is a function in the Prime Minister's office called Public Diplomacy Directorate. It doesn't have a head. It didn't have a head on October 7th. You have this war being fought, divided into a number of ministries. No ministry really has the real mandate to deal with it. Then you have the army spokesperson, and nobody's coordinated, and nobody's leading the efforts. So if I was to compare this to a military war, it would be like fighting a military war without a headquarters, without a unified strategy. And that's what's happening in the communications war.
How do you think Hamas views the outcome and aftermath of October 7th? Was it a success in their eyes?
I mean, I think if they're really honest with themselves, it was a complete failure. But they've managed through the propaganda and the communications warfare to isolate Israel diplomatically in a number of ways. Thank God, not everywhere, not in the most important places. We still have the backing of the United States.
Haviv Rettig-Gur, the now very popular Times of Israel correspondent who is also a podcast host and an analyst, saw it very differently. He saw the greatest success as fighting Hamas on their terms. What are those terms? He says those terms are a battlefield that is set up to maximize the potential of civilian casualties because Hamas is embedded in civilian infrastructure and disregards Palestinian life. The IDF's ability to fight Hamas on those terms and still to succeed in so many of its military aims and to minimize the casualty count as he saw it, even though that is not a perspective that is shared by many, was Israel's greatest success. Its greatest failure, however, was what he described as a political class that failed to step off their elitist ivory tower and join the people in the suffering and in the pain, specifically when it came to the Chatufim, the hostages. Now, Haviv was not here necessarily advocating for a particular resolution for the hostage crisis, but rather he was trying to shine a light on how the government was dealing with the pain and the trauma that Israeli society was feeling from the hostages and their engagement with the hostage families to try and come to a resolution, and in the meantime, to help them feel that they are supported and that they have the government at their fingertips when they need them.
I think the greatest success, in my view, little contrarian view, is what all the sort of Western intellectual class is convinced is our greatest mistake. Hamas built a battlefield. It built hundreds of miles of tunnels in order to transform Gaza into a type of battlefield, all of Gaza, with its civilians. And its civilians are functionally critical to the battlefield Hamas produced. The point of those tunnels is that we have to go after them through the civilian population. They run along streets. They don't run out into fields anywhere in Gaza. And in 11 months of war, not a single civilian has been allowed to step foot in a single tunnel. The point is to force the Israelis to destroy Gaza. And Hamas is upset at this moment that the death toll in Gaza isn't much higher. And if it was higher, Hamas believes, Sinwar believes, Hamas would be winning much more clearly. In other words, the pressure on Israel would be an order of magnitude greater, the price for Israel would be greater. Hamas wants to win a war against Israel through the destruction of Gaza. And after October 7, after seeing those videos of those Hamas attackers, infiltrators, kill parents and then sit down to eat food from the fridge of the home while teasing the children over their dead parents. After watching these people, the Israelis are willing, for the first time, They have not been willing in the past to pay the price Hamas set for destroying Hamas. And the world concluded, all these experts of war and the Institute of War and places like Columbia and Princeton and Harvard and in the media in the West, concluded that that was a great Israeli mistake. Hamas managed to impose on Israel a war that hurt Israel terribly. I submit to you that it is a horrifying tragedy. Hamas built the battlefield, Hamas set the price. We have to now show that we can win, not on our terms, not the war we want, a war of maneuver of tanks in the desert, the war we are classically brilliant at, but that we can win their war on their terms, in their battlefield, with the cost they impose. And we will still be standing, and they will still be destroyed. And the fact that the Israelis, with grim determination, were willing to go do that, the cost for Gazan civilians is the astonishing thing, is the horrifying thing. But the fact that we will fight them on their terms and win. Iran built Hezbollah for no reason except to be that second front. And so we have to be able to hurt Iran and Hezbollah with that second front. We have to be able to take every blow they can dish out, and we have to be able to defeat them on those terms, on their terms. And then they will be lost. They are a new strategy born in the failure of several old strategies that we defeated, again, on terms they imposed. And we have to do that again. And so the greatest Israeli success is the willingness to fight them on their terms and still do what needs to be done to win. The greatest Israeli failure, we just talked about. We have a political class that never joined us in the war. And that's when family betrays you a little bit, it hurts a lot more than when a random business partner betrays you a lot.
When you say political class, are you talking about, I'm almost imagining it horizontally or vertically, the horizontal line being people on the upper echelons of the...
My wife accompanied a family that had 8 members taken hostage on October 7. A friend of hers is a sister of one of the hostages. And that family managed to get a meeting with the Chancellor of Germany, because I don't remember exactly, I think 2 grandparents had German citizenship, before they could get a meeting with the most junior Israeli minister. I went to a funeral of a soldier in Gaza. Ministers came to the funeral because Dad, the father of the soldier, is politically involved, and fled after the eulogies so that they wouldn't accidentally rub elbows with people who they know hate them. So they flee. Kibbutz Nir Oz, 1/4 of the kibbutz, was killed or taken hostage on October 7. They have invited Netanyahu to visit, and he has refused. 11 months later, he has not yet visited. We have a political class made
Political
up...
class, you mean the...
Leadership.
Right-wing leadership. That was my question before. Are you referring to like the left and the right, and it's the higher ups?
I don't think it's
camps?
that they are right-wing that makes them abject cowards,
just as a
who don't
point of
deserve to lead us
categorization.
right now. I don't think that's it. We have polls of trust in which the least trusted politicians in Israel come from Likud, and also the most trusted come from Likud. I don't think the public, the feeling of them failing us, I don't think is partisan. Obviously, it's externalized in partisan ways, and obviously different political parties and campaigns are running partisan campaigns about it. But they failed us disastrously. Imagine being prime minister on October 7 and 11 months later still thinking it's everyone else's fault, after the strategy was yours and you ran the place for 13 years. Is that really what the right can give us? Can the right really not produce another leader? Can the right really not exact any kind of cost? For October 7, the containment strategy defined Netanyahu. He defended it. From the far left, they argued that we should lift the blockade. From the far right, they argued we should go in, and he defended the containment. And a lot
Containment of Hamas, you mean?
of Hamas in Gaza. And when it failed, right? So I would say it's a right-wing failure as such, if it turns out that the political right, the voters, ordinary people, forgive him. If they decide in the name of the partisanship and the great war on the left that everybody imagines on the right, and just like there's a great war on the right, which is coming for our democracy, everybody imagines these great enemies on the other side. If in the name of that imagined enemy, you forgive the leadership on October 7, then yeah, it's a right-wing problem. But that is our great weakness. And we have almost no other weaknesses.
Weakness or mistake?
I think that's a terrible mistake.
Okay.
I think that's a terrible mistake. That the Prime Minister on October 7 is the Prime Minister 11 months later, I think is a terrible precedent and a terrible lesson for the future for this country. And it's also unjustified. I'm deeply unimpressed by this government. I don't think it's produced the results we want, not in the war. I don't think it's handling the economy responsibly. I think that the debates in our... I can defend this with a lot of details if it's interesting. I don't know if it's interesting. But from my perspective, when you have now a budget debate happening today, the day we record, there's a budget debate happening between Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, and the Shas party. And there is no sense that there's a war on. And there's no sense that there are hundreds of thousands of Israeli households that have crashed economically. And they're talking about the same old yeshiva budget increases because they're in the coalition and you need their votes. I don't know what to do with that. Likud has an enormously high percentage of people in the war, voters who are actually serving in the war. They don't seem to take care of them. And because Israeli voting is so tribal, I'm not sure the voters will exact a cost. And that is their absolute God-given democratic right. But that's our weakness.
Yakov Katz, a political analyst who was formerly the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, said something quite similar. He saw the success not necessarily in how Israel fought the war, but the fact that Israel was able to fight a war and come out with such a victory or such a success against Hamas. Many people did not think that Israeli society was ready or prepared for an on-the-ground fighting capacity against Hamas, for fighting Hezbollah, for fighting Iran, for fighting the Houthis, and fighting so many others. But ultimately, as he says, Israel persevered. The greatest failure for him, however, came from the lack of a day-after plan for Gaza, which left the government, as he saw it, stagnant in this forever war, without any way to finally end it, because there was no way to end it. Nothing had been discussed that could lead to a real resolution.
Well, the greatest success to me has been what we've seen on the battlefield, right? The Israeli soldiers, the IDF, has performed in ways that I think many people were surprised. There was a delegitimization over years, for example, of the IDF ground forces and their ability. There was a fear that they would be slaughtered on the battlefields of places like Gaza and Lebanon.
Why is that? Where did that fear come from?
It came from, I mean, if you look back throughout, let's say, the last 19 years, or almost 20 years now, of Israeli ground operations, or Israeli operations in the Gaza Strip. Since we pulled out of Gaza in 2005, there have been about less than a dozen, but let's say about 10 operations that Israel has had to launch over the years against Hamas in Gaza. There was one just after the pullout in the summer of 2006 when Gilad Shalit was abducted, Summer Rains it was called. There was Cast Lead in 08-09. There was Pillar of Defense in 2012. There was Protective Edge in 2014. Black Belt, Guardian of Walls. I mean, all these different, they all always great names. They come up with all these wonderful names. But anyhow, except for 3, everything was always done by the air. Everything was always done by standoff. And specifically under this Prime Minister Netanyahu, there is always a hesitancy to send ground troops into Gaza. During the last time that ground forces went into Gaza prior to October 7 was in the war of 2014, Protective Edge. And the only reason they went into Gaza on the ground was because several weeks into that operation, which lasted about 51 days, was longer, I think, than the Yom Kippur War, was because of the fact that Hamas fighters were starting to pop out of tunnels. It was the first time tunnels were used effectively to infiltrate Israel. And then under pressure from within the security cabinet, specifically from Naftali Bennett, Bibi Netanyahu was left with no choice but to allow or to authorize a very limited operation into Gaza just to neutralize what were then called the cross-border tunnels, the ones that were actually infiltrating into Israel. But nothing about Hamas infrastructure, nothing about the tunnels, 300 miles worth of tunnels inside Gaza. And then in every operation since then, we attacked from the air. We didn't do that much to Hamas, even though we beat our chest and pretended and told ourselves stories that we did. So for years, there was a feeling that we shouldn't send troops in. God forbid. Who knows what will happen? And I think that the greatest success was the rehabilitation, to an extent, of the reputation of the IDF and its success on the battlefield. Contrary to what the world will want us or have us believe, the Israeli military has fought in probably the most humane way possible, sparing civilian casualties, fighting in a way of accuracy and precision unseen anywhere in the history of warfare, not just in modern warfare, the history of all warfare. Literally, people should be lining the streets applauding the IDF, but put that aside. I think that's been our greatest success, and we've succeeded. We're degrading Hamas's capabilities. We've eliminated their top leadership, also in Hezbollah. We've degraded and eliminated and destroyed and conquered, and in every encounter, we defeat them. That's a huge success. However, military action is only a means towards a political resolution. In other words, a war can be fought, and it should be fought, like in the attack that was forced upon us with October 7th, pushed us into a war that we did not want. But once you're in war, to be able to extricate yourself from that war and end that war, you need to have a political resolution. And there, I think we have failed, because we have never articulated what that political resolution looks like. What do we want the so-called day after to look like, specifically in Gaza and even in Lebanon? I mean, right now, as we're recording this, there's conversations, there's talk, there's the possibility that a ceasefire deal will be in place in the coming weeks, maybe even sooner, in Lebanon. And then there's criticism on the right, but one second, Hezbollah is still there. Just look at the other day. They fired over 100 rockets, 2 people killed in the northern city of Nahariya when a rocket slammed into a carpentry workshop. So Hezbollah is still there. What exactly, how are we agreeing to ending that war? But again, what do we want the end of that war to look like? We have to explain. We have to articulate that. You have to outline a vision to work towards. The military can help get you there, but you have to use political power and courage to do that.
And so the greatest mistake is that inability, or that lack of a plan afterward for what political resolution the war will.
From my perspective, yes, because I think that what it's done is a number of things. One is it makes it difficult for the military to operate, and you hear this from IDF officers. What are we doing still in Gaza? Why are we still there? Now, obviously, there's 101 hostages. That's a very clear objective. But you're not going to get back the hostages with military capabilities, right? We've succeeded in rescuing a handful, but you're not going to get back 101.
So I actually wanted to ask about that, because I believe yesterday or today, the New York Times reported that the IDF returned back to northern Gaza, and which is where the military campaign first began 14 months ago when Israel went into Gaza to fight Hamas. And the idea the New York Times was reporting on is that wherever the IDF has fought and has left, because they're not looking right now to occupy Gaza or to maintain a military presence in Gaza long term, Hamas has kind of went and filled back that vacuum. So if that's the case, if a lot of the military successes that Israel has had on the ground are in many ways being reversed the longer the war goes on, and it's not going to bring the hostages back, as you're saying, why do you believe that the war is continuing? And do you think it needs to end?
Well, let's unpack that just for a moment. First of all, getting back to what I was saying before about this day after plan, without a day after plan, what it does is it creates those vacuums. So imagine for a moment that Israel said from the beginning, look, I am degrading and eliminating Hamas because I want actor X or Y, it doesn't make a difference who that is, to come into the Gaza Strip and fill the vacuum. So I destroy, I eliminate, but I need now someone to control the area to prevent Hamas from coming back
So why
and
is there no day
reconstituting
after
itself.
plan?
Because it's political dynamite.
For
Like,
who?
For Prime Minister Netanyahu, look at the horizon for a moment and say to yourself, okay, who are those potential candidates to take over control and exert control over Gaza? You don't have many, right? It's not like the Arab countries are lining up to want to put boots on the ground. It's not like any Western country like America or the Europeans are lining up to put boots on the ground. So you're basically left with a couple of very bad options. Option one, you do it. Israel, reoccupy Gaza. We don't want to have to do that. Option two, Palestinian Authority, right? Weak, kicked out of Gaza back in 2007. They're paying salaries to terrorists. They don't know how to confront Hamas. They got problems of their own. And I'll just add to that, if you allow the Palestinian Authority into Gaza, the Palestinian Authority will then come to the world stage and say, hold on a second. We now are in Ramallah, in the West Bank, Area A. We're also now in Gaza. We're a state. Give us statehood. This government in Israel doesn't want to give statehood. So they want to avoid having the Palestinian Authority in control of Gaza. Your other option is what Israel has been maybe talking a bit about, which is some local clans, leaders, militias, whatever. I don't know what that means. To me, it sounds like a recipe towards for anarchy and not something that will bring long-term security. So when you don't have
Do you
something...
think that's the point? Do you think that that's a flaw?
Well, I think it's a flaw, but I think it's also the point. Because I think what this government, our government in Israel, wants to do is they don't want to give the Palestinian Authority the ability to return. They want to try to maneuver around that. They want to try to bring on board the Emiratis and the Saudis and the Americans in different ways. But they don't want to have to deal with the political dilemma that will come with that. Okay, Palestinian Authority, they are your partner or they're not your partner. Because we don't, this government definitely, with Bezalel Smotrich, with Itamar Ben-Gvir, and with the Likud as it is, can't legitimize Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader, as the leader of the Palestinians and work with him. So therefore, we're kind of trying to maneuver around that. And when that happens, as you said, Hamas just reconstitutes itself in all of these different things. So you'll pull out of an area, you'll walk away for a couple of weeks, and then you'll see, oh, 1 second, Hamas is back, got to go back in. It's not sustainable long term. Now, why is this happening? Because of politics. So it's because of politics that you can't articulate a day after plan. And it's also because of politics why the war continues to some extent. Because it's not bad for this government that the war carries on. I don't want to say that's the only reason. I don't think Netanyahu is that cynical, but I think that there is an element here of this long war is not necessarily bad for his political survival.
Rabbi Michael Melchior, an acclaimed peace activist and rabbi, saw Israeli society's ability to stand together and support one another as the greatest success. And it really touches on a theme that many people spoke about, which was the resilience that Israeli society showed after October 7th. But the failure, he said, came not necessarily from a hard military perspective, although there was definitely what to critique from there that he believed, but actually came from the moral failures, what he describes as a failure to feel compassion for, quote unquote, the other side, to feel compassion for civilian lives lost on the other side, to feel hurt by the prospect and even the necessity of war. In his view, he thought that there were actually a lot of other critiques about Israel's military strategy, but he did not go into them, citing what he said a lot more happening beyond the public eye.
Well, it's always this kind of question is difficult to answer. I think that the success was from the beginning that we all could stand together. That we had 120% of our people found that it was necessity to fight together because of the atrocities of the 7th of October, of that Black Shabbat, Simchat Torah, and we could stand together and fight together, shoulder to shoulder. I think that the failure has been that we haven't been able to find an alternative, how to end the war, how to release the hostages. That compassion, even to show also compassion to those innocent who have been killed also on the other side, even to not only to express it in words, but really to feel it, that's a failure, and not to just to say that we are wanting to end the rule of Hamas in Gaza is not sufficient. That is, you have to do something about it, and there are those who do want to take over the rule of Gaza, and Hamas does not want to continue the rule in Gaza. So why don't we do it? And that we don't do, of all kinds of different reasons. That's already going into political talk, but you need to be able to, just as you start a war, you need to be able to also to finish the war, and you need to be able to look forward, to take care that this is the end of wars, because we can't have a new war then starting in another half year, another year, to look towards to more comprehensive solutions. And this kind of thinking, of strategic, long-term thinking, we just don't have, not the political leadership, not on the right, not on the left, not our commentators. Nobody thinks in those terms.
So I have two questions for you on that. In November of 2023, a little bit about a month after October 7th, I forget which paper it was, but you spoke to them about, you gave a quote to them about the need to, what it seemed to be at least, the need to end the war and the need for a sensitivity towards civilian casualties and whatnot. For many people, that's been something that they came to, an opinion they came to over the last 15 months. I'm curious how the last 15 months have been for you, given that it seems as if that was a perspective you held much earlier after October 7th.
Yes, because I know a little bit more than what is in the public eye, and also more than what most cabinet ministers and others know about what is going on the other side, because of my relationship also with the Muslim world. And therefore, I know that it was possible to, at a very early stage, to release the hostages and to get much better solutions than those we got to. And this way we've been involved in many ways in saving thousands of lives also during this past year. And I think that there are things which should be highlighted, which are not usually highlighted.
Such as what?
For example, what happened October 7th inside Israel, and by far and large, I include in that also what happened in East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, with many parties who, when Sinwar called upon the Arab Israelis to join the battle, and thought it would be something like what happened in May 21, when we got a little taste of what could happen, and the Muslims went out very strongly and unanimously, went out totally, and these are in many ways our partners in the peace work, and they went to all the mosques and they said, no, this is not Islam. What you did is against Islam, and therefore we're not joining forces with you. and this is a desecration, what they call in their language also a desecration of God's name. And this story is not told in the Jewish world, how they called me and my colleagues those days, and also later when things happened, difficult things for them, also innocent people who were arrested and so on, and afterwards released after months being in prisons.
You're referring to in the aftermath of October 7th. There were
in the aftermath, when many people were arrested just
many
to be on the
Arabs in Israel were arrested.
yes, and they said, they called and said, don't abandon us. We're in this. We're in this for the long run to have peace. We really want to have peace. And in spite of the way we're being treated, we're in this to have peace, and we're willing to risk a lot.
Do you feel like they have been abandoned?
Well, they asked us not to abandon them, and we're not abandoning them. We're not doing that, and I feel that there's a very important message that if you build coalitions, also with those who are considered sometimes to be extreme on both sides, I think that those are the important coalitions to make. Not to make coalitions necessarily with those who are the usual peacemakers, the secular left-wing, because they can always agree with each other, but they don't make any change. You need to speak to, when it comes to, on the Jewish side, you need to speak to the right-wing religious leaders, and in the Muslim side, you need to speak with the right-wing Islamic leaders, and that is where the change needs to happen, and where it is happening, but it's happening quietly under the radar, and things are happening under the radar since October 7th, which couldn't have happened before the 7th of October. People are talking, people are moving in their opinions, people are willing to take risks, and...
Are these people with actual political power or power to make
yes,
change?
people with power, people with influence, which very often are not the people who can move things, people who have influence in much more than politicians have. But they also have influence with the politicians. So this is very important, as well as it's important to work on the educational field inside, and also those efforts have intensified since October 7th, that you can have schools and educational institutions and communities where very, very religious and very, very heretic kids can study together, and not in order to convert each other, but in order to intensify the unity inside the people. And we have more calls for schools and for communities in the north and in the south and around Gaza and everywhere since October 7th than we've had ever before. We don't have time to do public relations because so many are just calling us to start new schools and kindergartens and high schools and mechinot and which are post-school institutes and batei midrash, and it's changing the country. It's a thirst. You don't have to invent the wheel and to sit in round tables. How do we make unity? It's already being done. It's happening.
Micah Goodman thought that the greatest success was Israel being able to defeat and overturn an existential threat that the society and the government did not even know was present. He thought this showed up through every enemy that Israel defeated and incapacitated. And he thought that this was a miracle happening right before our eyes.
Well, this podcast is recorded about a few days after the end of the 12-day war. So it's quite a moment. It's a real moment, and it's hard to know what moment we're in now. But it feels like this might be a 6-day war moment, a moment that changed the Middle East and changed Israeli history. And as a person that's trying to observe history while it's happening, although it's impossible to see history while it's happening, I find this moment exciting, terrifying, and definitely, with a lot of promise, and definitely very interesting.
Interesting how?
It's just interesting. The world is becoming very interesting. Israel is interesting. The world is interesting. The Middle East is interesting. It's a pregnant moment. Now, I like that metaphor, pregnant, because I'm Israeli. We don't. It's not an Israeli moment. It's not an Israeli metaphor. But like the idea that the pregnant could be a moment could be pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't know with what.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a pregnant moment. Now, will this lead to more peace in the Middle East? Or more importantly, will this moment lead to more peace within Israel, between Israelis? These are very big questions.
Do you think it will?
I think it could go to many directions. That's what makes this moment very interesting.
What does it depend on?
Meaning, what does it depend if they'll have peace and more peace
Well,
in
I
the
mean,
Middle East?
you said that it can go in different directions, and this moment's almost like at a fork in the road. So what does that depend on?
Well, how are we... I think this has been a real Israeli victory. This war has been Israeli victory.
Which war? Against Iran or against Hamas?
Well, again, since we're recording this, the war against Iran
Mm-hmm.
has been an incredible Israeli victory. Iran has tried to build what the octopus, a network of terrorist proxies surrounding Israel, so that in one day, when Israel is surrounded and isolated, it could press a button that unites all the fronts and destroys Israel.
Mm-hmm.
That was the grand plan of Iran. Now, obviously, we were surprised on October 7th, but I think in the past few months, we realized we were surprised again.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the deeper surprise. The deeper surprise is that we start to realize that what would have happened if Hezbollah would have attacked Israel all in, full-blown, in October 7th? What would have happened if that... And while they're attacking us from the north, doing to us much more than Hamas, the Radwan forces, were doing to us in the south, while Israel south is being conquered, as north is being conquered, we're also targeted with thousands of accurate missiles on strategic sites. The electricity, the central command locations, and Israel goes into chaos. What happens? The most probable scenario that this situation, Palestinians from the West Bank or Judea and Samaria would see that, feel that Israel is starting to go down, and as a Shabak person told me, that's the moment they join. Mm-hmm. And the violent parts of Israeli Arabs, the violent parts, will join. So you could imagine a scenario, a very high scenario, that has more than 50% probability of complete like chaos that could lead to complete loss of control of Israel over the situation. Meaning, we were under existential threat, and here's the thing, we didn't know it. I mean, many Israelis knew that our neighbors want to destroy Israel. Some of us knew that they might have the guts to attack Israel, but I think none of us really knew that they actually have the capability.
Did you know it?
To do it. I didn't know it. That's why I call it the second surprise. The first surprise is that they attacked us. The second surprise starts kicking in throughout the war when you realize, oh my God. It turns out that we were under existential threat and we didn't know it. Israel was beneath a volcano. We were building our beautiful lives, which means every company in Israel is overvalued. The stock market of every company was overvalued. The rational decisions of people to make Aliyah was not like we were under real existential threat and we didn't know it. So it turns out that this war dismantled a threat that we didn't really knew. I mean, did some people in the Israeli intelligence, maybe some people theoretically knew it, but October 7th made that we could now imagine the real threat. So what happened in this war is we dismantled an existential threat, not a potential. The Iran nuclear is a potential existential threat, but in October 7th we were under real existential threat. Now, and so we dismantled that threat and the whole idea of surrounding Israel with proxies. And what Israel did was the following: Sinwar had a double gamble. He bet that Israel is very divided and that the Iran front of proxies is very united. So his bet was he'll attack Israel because it was 2023, judicial reform and all that. We were very divided. He'll attack us and we'll collapse into our own divisions. That was bet number one. Bet number two is when he'll attack us, Hezbollah will join. The proxies in Iraq will join. The Palestinians in Yehuda v'Shamron or West Bank, they'll join. Iran eventually will join. And what happened was he got his two gambles wrong. His two bets were wrong. He attacked us. Israel attacked us, and Israel didn't collapse into its divisions. It united. And their front did not unite. Israel had the privilege to fight Hamas without Hezbollah coming in all in, and then to fight Hezbollah without Iran saving Hezbollah, and then to attack Iran without Hezbollah helping out Iran. So we got to fight this one by one. And that's, by the way, why we had such significant victory. So he got his boat. He was betting on our division and their unity. What really happened is that we're much more united than they imagined. And it turns out that they're more divided, have less solidarity between themselves than we saw. So that was stage one of the war. The reason why I'm hopeful now is because we might moving into stage two.
One of the most interesting answers that I thought to this question about the greatest success and greatest mistake in the war came from Rabbi Mosheh Lichtenstein, a Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Har Etzion and the son of Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, who said that the greatest success was the Mesirat Nefesh, the self-sacrifice exhibited across Israeli society. The willingness to go to war, to drop everything, to leave loved ones, to leave professions behind, to leave aspirations and futures behind, and to show up for the country when the country was calling in its hour of need. That ability to fight back, but not just to fight back and to succeed, but to fight back knowing that we might not succeed, is what he saw was the greatest success. The greatest failure, he said, invoked an idea from Sefer Devarim, that the source of our power comes from our own hand and not from God. As Rav Moshe saw it, we were investing too much of ourselves and too much of our hope in our own military power, in our own might, as opposed to having a broader emunah, a broader faith or hope in how we might come to a better resolution and hold ourselves accountable for the power we have and for how we wield it.
The biggest success, I think, is I think we've been able to fight back. We've been able to, I'll say like this, the biggest success, spiritually, is the willingness for self-sacrifice, is the willingness for Kiddush Hashem. It's the fact that people are willing to leave their families, they're willing to go to war, they're willing to put themselves in the line of danger. The whole volunteer, I believe that this Mesirat Nefesh, the willingness to sacrifice your individual existence, even to put your individual existence on the line, and to sacrifice, to make the ultimate sacrifice in the name of greater values and ideals. First and foremost, religious for those who fight but if not for Am Yisrael, or to put differently, to go to war, to enact a covenant between God and His people. I think that's the main privilege, the main merit or zchut that we've had the past 100 years. The Mesirat Nefesh, ever since the first Zionists came here, has been astounding and amazing and inspiring. How people are willing to really, in the name of greater ideals and values, to put themselves in danger. It's It's extremely inspiring. There have been many, many inspiring stories about individuals in terms of the commitment to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the commitment to Am Yisrael, both I mentioned before, but also in many small actions, how they live and how they actually go about their tasks when they're at war. Same holds true, I think, for the families who are willingly allow the fathers and husbands and sons to go to war. It's I find it extremely inspiring.
And the greatest mistake, you would say?
Just 1 second.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I think it's like this. I think restoring the deterrence. I do believe that. I said before, parts of me are quite bothered by the destruction, and beyond a certain amount, I really believe it's wrong. And part of me, though, I have a split screen. Part of me believes that the fact that the Gaza has been reduced to rubble will restore the deterrence, will, in a sense, will exact a price. And I said before, wars are done between collectives. And at the end of the day, this is not between the individual here, individual there. It's between a collective. The collective has a government. They support them. So those I think are the many minor, I think there are many also achievements of many sensitive individuals who've been able to do a lot of good. But that I think is the greatest success. I think the greatest failure, as I said before, I think is the reliance upon power and the belief that power can solve all problems, the unwillingness to think about the day after. And what bothers me even more so is the unwillingness of the government to take any accountability. That is a major message of Tanakh. This is not just like my political position. A major message of Tanakh is accountability. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't enter the land of Israel because he made some errors. There's constant accountability in Tanakh. It's a theme which runs throughout. And certainly another theme is that a person has to take accountability. I think the unwillingness of the government to take any accountability, its unwillingness to examine itself. Judaism believes in tshuva. Tshuva means, first of all, you have to understand what went wrong, both spiritually and also, of course, in this case, practically. I just find the lack of leadership, the unwillingness to take responsibility is horrendous. As part of this, I think the government was very remiss in its acknowledgement of the loss. I don't think there was any, like memorial ceremony for those who were killed in Simchat Torah on October 7th. Eventually, Yom HaZikaron rolled around, and there was some, and even that was not exactly properly done. But there was never a public ceremony, a government ceremony to acknowledge the loss, to memorialize. I do believe that even time of war can be done, and certainly a year and a half later, there certainly could have been a major assembly or expression of Avelut. Judaism believes Avelut is a religious value. You have to mourn. That to me is another major failure. I'm not talking about now to have established investigation, but just to want to say, to mourn, to express the loss. Now, from a religious perspective, I think what happened in Simchat Torah is what you would call, to use theological terminology, is hester panim. Meaning God concealed himself. He looked away from us. He hid out of anger, or because he forsake us. Now, we're not getting into nuances, whether we'll call it hester panim or call it divine punishment. It's a major distinction, but for the purpose of this podcast, I don't think it's crucial. Either whether God decided to punish us severely, or worse, he hid himself and just walked away for that one day or for that period. it requires a religious response, a response of tshuva, repentance. I think every community has to do that. Every community has to repent. The secular community, the religious community, the right wing, the left wing, the Haredim, the religious Zionists, everyone has. And when we're talking about repentance, I'm not talking about what's called in Yiddish to clap al chet on Yenim's chest. No, I'm not talking about that each one should point out the other segments' shortcomings, and the religious Zionists say what's wrong with the Haredim, the Haredim say what's wrong with the secular say what's wrong with religious Zionists. I'm talking about each community doing introspection. Tshuva really means you introspect and you think what's wrong with you, not you point fingers and blame at others. It's difficult. How to do public tshuva is a very difficult concept, and I'm not sure I have a roadmap exactly how to do it. But it seems clear to me that there should be a point, or there should have been, and maybe there still should be a point, in which people groups get together and they analyze themselves. They do self-introspection. They do tshuva, and you surface. And you surface problems. I think that's the proper religious response. I don't see it's really happened. I'll just add one on that point. Another accomplishment or major achievement, I think, of the war was it did a lot to heal some of the rift in society from 2 years ago. I think it's often overemphasized. I think, unfortunately, the basic rifts were papered over. And I still believe that society is at the moment torn apart, that the basic division in society has not really been healed. I think many people, particularly on the right, romanticize that the war solved all problems, that people fought together, and when you're in a tank or in a Gamash, an APC, you're not, you don't care who's in right, who's on left, who's Dati, who's Chiloni. All that is true. And I think that there certainly was another positive outcome of the war. Unfortunately, I don't see it spilling over into society, into larger society. So partially that. Another thing which I thought was positive was the ability to express avelut within the communities. I said before, I think the government did not do that, but I do believe that the communities get a lot of mutual support. There was communities coming together and supporting their members that I thought was positive and inspiring. There was a lot of mutual support.
So if you were to ask me what Israel's greatest success and greatest mistake in the war against Hamas was, I'd say it depends who you're asking and when you're asking them. There are so many different things happening in Israel. There are wars happening on all different fronts. There is the hostage crisis. There are different issues happening with Gaza and the future of the conflict. There are issues happening internally in Israel with leadership crises, economic issues, and ultimately Israel becoming a pariah state in the world stage. So Israel's greatest success and greatest mistake in this war against Hamas, I guess, is still to be seen.